What can Labour learn from the defeat in the US presidential elections? And I think it is important that any Labour advisor, politician, look at what went on in America and look, can we learn any lessons from what went on there? I think anything like this can absolutely be learned from, but it's the question of, can you learn the right lessons? And ultimately, maybe the $15 million question is, what is the right lesson to learn from a UK perspective of a American election? And it's quite hard because the US voting public, vastly different priorities to the UK public, vastly different priorities to French, German, Netherlands, Dutch, Polish, Italian, etc., etc., etc. Vastly, vastly different. But one thing in particular here that I don't think often gets brought up enough is MPs. Because MPs do a lot of work, and there is a lot of loyalty that MPs can build up over their time in Parliament. And I've talked about this before about what happened to Lee Anderson, because we were looking going up into this election, in our election, and all the polls were saying Lee Anderson likely going to lose his seat. But as I've said, people ignored the fact that once he got the boot from the Conservatives, he went very quiet. He went absolutely quiet, and his constituency forgot all about his crazy antics. But he then started working more and more as a constituency MP, which is what ultimately re-won him his election. So there's vastly, there is lessons to learn, but it's what lessons should we learn, and what information can we take from that election that can be applied to a UK context. So it is difficult to look at all this data, all this information, and say, we should be doing that. Because if we did that and we looked at a, UK version of this, is that really going to appeal to UK voters? It's a big question, because different voter groups, anything, even if you took like the same voter age groups, vastly driven by different things, from one country to another as well. So it is very, I think definitely lessons need to be learned and looked at, and it's what lessons should be learned. So we're going to have a look at this, because I think this definitely is a question that should be asked about what we should be learning from that defeat and what can be applied to a UK context. So before we go getting into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can more buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. So this comes from The Guardian with the title of Labour Advisors Want Lessons Learned from the Harris Defeat. Voters Set the Agenda. So there is, of course, a tough lesson that senior Labour advisors want some of their internal party critics to learn from the Democrats' disastrous defeat. That optimism is not the answer they think it is. Okay, so let's see what they've got to put on this. So when Kamala Harris's campaign had the most momentum, at the core of it was joy. And although in the final weeks were very dominated by darker warnings of fascism under Donald Trump, Harris then returned to the theme of optimism in one of her final messages to supporters, saying that they had, quote, brought back the joy. Senior Labour's insiders are, of course, privately scathing about those tactics, saying that the final days of were just a parade of celebrities in the middle of a cost of living crisis, said one. Another said that it was a warning to those inside their own tent who were calling for more optimism, more joy. How is that working out? Said one. Another described the Democrats as, quote, running on vibes rather than an argument. And you've got to remember, I think if you took this to someone who was American, they might have vastly different criticisms. But you've got to remember, this is UKers, people involved in Parliament, in sort of politics, looking, well, how does this apply to ours? You know, how will this apply to our own politics? What lessons, again, as I said at the beginning, what lessons can be learnt from this? So, for those several, of course, now currently plotting the government's strategy and messaging, this is one hard but very necessary truth. Where life is very tough, joy, of course, is not the right tone. They believe that vindicates Starmer's decision to keep underlining how he understands that life for many Britons is difficult. Again, I think that is true. I think Keir Starmer saying that, acknowledging that not, life for everyone in the UK is good, but, we need to sort of help improve it. We need to start doing these things. I think that shows Starmer is grounded a lot more so than either Rishi Sunak or even someone like, Kimmy Badenoch, which again, I think definitely separates, him and the Conservatives on that. Many in the party will, of course, still disagree. They hate now the funeral tone and do believe that it's giving voters now a license to give up all hope in this government already. We've barely even started, and yet, oh no, doom and gloom. That's it, guys. Pack it all up. At worst, it of course gives a quarter now to the dark forces in UK politics who will sell the idea that politicians will change nothing. In number 10, of course, there is a very grim-faced resolve to keep the party communications now focused on realism, an acknowledgement, of course, of the hard times, and a roadmap of how that will change. The result, of course, in the US is very evident and writ large. The scale of the challenge that Labour now faces, of course, at the next election. Biden's was an incumbent government felled by the economy. Despite the creation of over 15 million jobs, the highest growth in the G7, and wages increased by almost 20%, but it was inflation, the rising cost of very simple necessities such as bread and eggs, that voters cited. So you can have, as we saw here under Biden, the best economy. You can fix the economy. You can create all these jobs. You can have wage increases by almost 20%, but it was inflation, the rising cost of basic goods and things. And we have seen this, by the way. If you've been watching people interviewed, you will notice grocery prices they will cite and gas prices. Those are, at least I've certainly noticed, and I think other people will agree with them as well. I will see that is the two main things you are seeing being Americans being cited. Why did you vote? Price is too high. Price of gas is too high. I think that's it, and I think they somehow expect Donald Trump to fix that. And yet, look at his policies. It ain't gonna work. But hey, I've said before, congratulations, guys, but you've won pretty much a clean sweep now. If you can't fix it, if there are problems, it's all on you guys. There is nowhere to hide. And we saw what happened to our own government who, in 2019, when they won a complete clean sweep, and what happened to them on that. So it continues. On the Atlantic side, the lessons that are already being learned is that it is meant now on the unceremonial ditching of the language of Starmer's first mission of the economy, that it isn't working. No voter wants to hear about the highest growth in the G7. They want to hear about the price of a Tesco shop. And bear in mind, I think this would be great if Labour really start looking at, like, what is going. If you go to Tesco and, the price of your Tesco shop has gone down, that is going to affect a voter far, far more than probably anything else. And I think that's what a lot of politicians really have to learn on how we can get that to happen. Of course, bringing down inflation, always a very, very big challenge, especially when we're going to have those Trump tariffs come on, which are going to affect our inflation. We're already hearing apparently today, rates apparently may go up or down today. We don't know. We'll see what happens. But again, we are going to be affected by outside forces. Even more so, it's going to be more impactful on us because, of course, we are not in the EU. We explained this, I don't know how many times, 2016, but yeah, still today, we're being proved right. So another, of course, example for UK strategists do cite, of course, is the number of jobs that Britain's administration created. But for those already now in a low-paid job, that statistic is completely irrelevant. It sounds like bragging, and it did nothing to help their day-to-day costs. So already, what are we hearing? Care about how much it costs people to walk out of Tesco's with. How much did it cost them to go to Tesco? And someone who is in a low-paid job, what about their day-to-day costs? I think it is very clear that is something, we should be taking and looking at. And of course, the campaign had another lesson that the party now wants to hammer home to its activists and MPs, that voters will set the agenda, not politicians. So in the US, polls repeatedly suggested that the top two issues for voters were the economy and immigration. There, you need to talk about the economy and immigration on strategy suggest. The Labour Party had a habit in the past of saying, oh no, we don't want to talk about those issues. We want to try and make the election about a different question. No matter how hard the Democrats tried to make it about something else, whether it was about reproductive freedom or anything else, that wasn't what voters had front and center of their minds going into the election. And I think they are right on that. I think the Harris campaign did not talk about the bread and butter issues which American voters wanted to talk about. And I think that is true. I think that is easily the most true thing that we have to look at going into the next election in a couple of years' time. What is it voters are saying? If it is economy and immigration, then Labour has to tackle those questions and not be afraid to tackle those questions. And I have said this about everyone else on my side of the political aisle as well, on the left. We have to engage in these discussions. We should not be afraid of talking about immigration. If people are worried about immigration, we should be able to engage with them on that discussion with them and talk with them about it and be prepared to have that discussion. But very often, a lot of people on the left are not prepared to have that discussion. So for those, of course, in the Labour government who did watch the US election and very closely, they very clocked the early discipline of the Trump campaign, even when their own algorithms were serving them now constant clips of the former president's gaffes. Trump can hardly be described as a poster boy for message discipline, but amid his ramblings, there were very targeted messages on the economy to be clipped and pumped into ads, that they got an incredible set and clear set of messages if you want to look for them, said one Labour source. But many on the centre left may have never even encountered them. Number 10 and the Treasury do believe that the budget will come to be a very significant part of pushing their message. It drew very deliberate dividing lines. It picked an argument and it showed who it prioritized. Those who drive to work, who pick up a payslip and want to wait on hold for a GP appointment. Despite, of course, a slew of negative front pages and the reaction from farmers and businesses on tax hikes, in the 9 focus groups run so far, there was a very cautious optimism from strategists that it had worked, that people felt relieved that their own pay packets had not been hit. Again, it would be interesting to see the results of those focus groups, what they thought about the budget. And yet, many on the left, I'm just going to say this, many on the left constantly criticized the fact Starmer lied so heavily on focus groups, and that, Labour used focus groups. Kind of important. Kind of important, especially if you are looking at that line that voters are going to set the agenda for any potential election going forward. What they want to talk about is what they want to talk about, what is the most pressing issues of their concern. And you've got to be prepared for all these talking points, should they come up, as well as putting out your own messaging during this time. And I think that is setting a very good tone going forward. So, to feel better off, it will take a lot longer. And there is no sign yet of much wage growth. And of course, that government killer inflation sets look to return next year, in part now caused by this Labour government's very own choice to borrow more. Living standards, of course, is a far tougher test to get the numbers on a spreadsheet to look a little bit healthier. The budget's own forecasts do show improvements over this parliament, but it will be very limited. But lessons from across the globe do show that it is the only way that any government can actually survive this trend of volatile electorates who want to seem to be in the mood to punish incumbents. And that, I think, is also true. I think that is definitely the lesson that we are seeing across the globe. That electorates are in the mood to punish incumbents. And one of the things I think we need to do is we need to look at maybe an Inflation Reduction Act of our own. Maybe we need to look at something like that, because that did work for Biden. That really did work for Biden. But yeah, we're going to have a lot of inflationary pressures. Most of them, bear in mind, are going to be because of the Trump tariffs. But what do you think to some of those things that were said there? I think a lot of them are quite true. I think you need to not just look as almost a general sort of appeal to voters. You almost need to go even further down and just speak to the individual in sort of politics, and almost think as if, when Keir Starmer's, speaking to an audience or doing a speech, his speech should almost be directed as if he is addressing an individual. So we'll see what happens going forward, but it's still very early days. But good lessons to learn. Very good lessons to learn. Does look like they are probably going to learn the right lessons, that, you have to speak to voter individuals. You have to speak to what matters to voters most. How much did your Tesco shop cost? You know, have GP waiting lists gone down? I think that is going to be very big at the next election. That could be a massive moment at the next election. Has Labour achieved a reduction in not Labour waiting lists, in in GP waiting lists? Have they achieved that? I think that is going to be very, very true. I think that is something, if Labour can achieve that, and I think they can, I really do think they can. If they can do that, that will be very important going into the next election. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. Do you think there's any more lessons that need to be learned from the American defeat? Let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.